Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be tackling presidential pardons.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's a big one.
It is a big word.
It's been in the news a lot lately,
Mhm.
and I think it's something that people are really interested in, but maybe don't totally understand how it works.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's one of those things that's kind of shrouded in, legalese and history and all of that.
Right, exactly. And plus it's like this super powerful tool that presidents have, but can also be really controversial.
Oh, absolutely. Like throughout history, there have been some pardons that have really caused a stir.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I think a lot of people right now are thinking about the recent pardon of Hunter Biden by his father, President Biden.
Right. And especially with Trump about to be back in the White House, I think everyone's kind of wondering what this all means for the future of presidential pardons.
Yeah, exactly. Like, is this going to become the new normal, or is this just like a one-off thing? So in this deep dive, we're going to try to unpack some of the key details and different perspectives on this pardon and hopefully get a better sense of what it all means.
Sounds good.
All right, so just to set the stage a little bit, the presidential pardon power comes from Article 2 of the Constitution. And it basically gives the president the ability to forgive federal crimes.
It's like a get out of jail free card, but only the president has it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's been used in a lot of different ways throughout history.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's been used to correct injustices or offer second chances.
Right.
But then there are also times when it's been used in ways that seem, well, a little more questionable.
Yeah, like maybe to help out political allies or, something like that.
Right, exactly. So that's why this whole Hunter Biden situation is so interesting. It touches on all these sensitive issues, like family ties and political motivations and the idea of equal justice under the law.
And I think that's what makes this so fascinating for a lot of people. It's not just about the legal stuff, but it's also about what it says about our society and how power works.
Right, like, does this mean that if you're connected to the right people, you can get away with things that other people can't?
Yeah, and what does that mean for everyday Americans who don't have that kind of influence?
Totally. So to get into the specifics a little bit, Hunter Biden was convicted of firearm and tax offenses.
Right.
But the pardon that President Biden issued is super broad. It covers over a decade, from 2014 to 2024.
Wow, that is a long time.
It is a long time. And some people are saying it's almost like he's trying to preemptively shield Hunter from any future investigations.
Oh, wow. So even for things he hasn't been charged with yet.
Potentially. Yeah.
And
And the scope of this pardon is really what's drawing the most attention and comparisons to other high-profile pardons, like the one granted to Richard Nixon back in 1974.
oh, right, the Watergate scandal?
Exactly, and that was also a blanket pardon intended to protect Nixon from any potential charges.
So this is kind of similar to that.
Yeah, I mean, experts like Margaret Love, who used to be the U.S. pardon attorney, are saying they haven't seen language this broad in a pardon document since Nixon.
Wow, so this is definitely not something you see every day.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting because President Biden has said that he believes Hunter was unfairly targeted because of politics, and he wants to protect him from further attacks.
I can see how someone might feel that way.
Right, like from a father's perspective, I mean, who wouldn't want to protect their kid?
Yeah, for sure. But at the same time, when you're talking about potential federal crimes and the president's son, it gets a lot more complicated.
Exactly, like where do you draw the line?
Right. And does this set some kind of precedent for other powerful people? Like, what message does it send to regular people who don't have that kind of connection?
Right, it's like, are we all really equal under the law, or are there different rules for different people?
Yeah, and I think those are the questions that a lot of people are grappling with right now and that we're going to be exploring further in this deep dive.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've kind of set the stage here, but to really understand what's going on, we need to dive deeper into the specifics of Hunter Biden's legal situation and the whole context surrounding this.
Okay, let's do it. Yeah, so one of the things that's really fueling this whole debate is Hunter Biden's business dealings.
Right, right.
Especially the stuff in Ukraine and China while his dad was vice president.
Yeah, it's definitely raised some eyebrows.
Oh, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. And, I mean, there hasn't been any evidence of wrongdoing by President Biden himself.
Right.
But it just kind of looks bad, you know?
Yeah, it's like that whole appearance of impropriety thing,
Exactly. It just feeds into this idea that the rules are different for the wealthy and powerful.
which I think is something that a lot of people are already worried.
Oh, absolutely. And especially in this case, because it plays right into the hands of those who are claiming that the Justice Department is biased against conservatives.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, they point to all the investigations into Trump and his associates.
Right.
And they say, look, this is proof that the system is rigged against us. while Hunter Biden gets a free pass.
Hmm. So it's not just about this one pardon. It's about how it fits into a larger pattern,
Exactly. It's about this perception that the system is unfair.
and that it's rigged against the average person.
Yeah, and, President Biden campaigned on restoring trust in the Justice Department
Right.
after
Well,
all the chaos of the Trump years.
yeah.
And this just kind of throws a wrench into that whole thing.
Yeah, it does. It makes you wonder, like, if Hunter Biden wasn't the president's son, would this pardon have even been considered?
Right. Like, would any of this even be happening?
Exactly.
And I think that's what's so frustrating for a lot of people. It feels like there's one set of rules for the elites and another set of rules for everyone else.
And that's a really dangerous thing for a democracy.
It is, because if people lose faith in the system, then it starts to break down.
Right. People might be less likely to cooperate with law enforcement or report crimes.
Yeah, exactly. Or even serve on juries.
Like a domino effect.
Yeah, one instance of perceived injustice can have a ripple effect throughout the whole system.
And it creates this breeding ground for cynicism and distrust.
Which just makes it harder to solve problems.
Okay, so we've talked about the legal and ethical concerns, the political firestorm, and this whole issue of public trust.
Right.
But I think to really get the full picture, we need to put this pardon into historical context.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, presidential pardons have been around since the founding of the country,
Mm-hmm.
and they've always been a bit controversial.
Oh, for sure. Like, there are tons of examples of pardons that have caused a stir.
So what are some of the parallels that jump out at you?
Well, one that immediately comes to mind is President Ford's pardon of Richard Nixon.
Oh, right back in 1974.
Yeah, that was a huge deal. It was incredibly controversial at the time.
I can imagine.
A lot of people felt like Nixon was getting away with something.
And didn't that pardon have a lasting impact on public trust?
Oh, absolutely. It definitely contributed to this sense of cynicism and disillusionment.
Like, there's one set of rules for the powerful and another for everyone else,
Exactly.
which seems to be a recurring theme throughout history.
Yeah. It's sad, but true.
It is sad.
There have been other instances, too, like President Clinton's pardon of Mark Rich.
Oh,
That was a fugitive financier, and he got pardoned on Clinton's last day in office.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really? Last day in office, huh?
Yeah, it was super controversial.
I bet.
And then, of course, there were several pardons by President Trump that also sparked a lot of debate.
Right, like Roger Stone and Michael Flynn.
Exactly. Those were some of his close allies, and it just looked like he was trying to protect his friends.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue that it wasn't at least a little bit shady.
Right. It just feeds into that whole idea that the justice system is rigged.
So where does that leave us with the Hunter Biden pardon? I mean, it seems like it's part of this larger pattern of presidents using this power in ways that benefit those close to them or advance their political agenda.
I think that's a fair assessment.
And it's this pattern that really erodes public trust in the system.
Oh, absolutely. When people see those in power acting like they're above the law, it creates a lot of cynicism and distrust.
And that can have a real impact on how people interact with the government and with each other,
Exactly. It can lead to apathy and disengagement.
which is not good for a democracy.
Not at all.
So what can we do about it? Is there any way to prevent this from happening in the future?
Well, there have been some calls for reforms like limiting the president's pardon power or requiring more transparency in the process.
Okay, so like making it more clear why someone is being pardoned.
Exactly. But any changes like that would be really hard to implement.
Yeah, I mean, it would require a lot of political will.
And that's something that's often in short supply.
For sure.
Yeah,
Well, it feels like we're at a crossroads here.
I agree.
We can either continue down this path of increasing distrust, or we can try to find a way to restore faith in the idea that justice is applied fairly.
And that everyone is treated equally under the law.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
Regardless of your wealth, your connections, or your last name.
Right. It's about ensuring that the system works for everyone, not just the privileged few.
Well said. I think that's a good place to wrap up this deep dive.
Yeah, it's been a really thought-provoking conversation.
It has. We've covered a lot of ground today, explored the complexities of the Hunter Biden pardon, looked at the historical context, and talked about what this all means for the future of the pardon power and our justice system.
And I hope our listeners have gained a better understanding of this issue and are inspired to keep learning and engaging in these conversations.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone.
Until next time.
Stay curious, stay informed, and keep asking those tough questions.